Okay, so you recognize the size I showed this morning for the tutorial. So this is the second day together. And this morning you had this tutorial on analytical calculations. I hope you enjoyed that calculation. This was quite simple because it was only two dislocations interacting. We can do much better, but then we need to use a computer. Because then if you have 3, 4, 5 dislocations, just imagine how complicated will be the calculations. And then if they move, then you are dead. So the computer will help you to do that. And this is what we plan to do next week, typically. Okay, so next week, at the end of this week, I will explain you what you need to bring in order for this to work. But you already know that you will need some Linux device. Could be a VirtualBox on Windows or Macintosh or purely Linux distribution. Any distribution will work. And we need also Paraview to visualize the DD. Okay. So let's go. So the tutorial is over. So I stop it. I will give that. This is provided in the PDF file you will get at the end of the day. So you will have these curves and this animation here. And now let's start with the next lectures, which is about from dislocation to plasticity. How now those dislocations lead to plasticity? What are the mechanisms, because there is not a single one, but many, that will be involved in dislocation and relation with the mechanical behavior. So it's at that stage we are now located at that part of my lecture set. Hardening mechanism. So this is the one I will speak about, the hardening mechanism. So what could harden your material? So you know what is hardening, by the way? I forgot to introduce that. Hardening, you know what that does it mean? What is hardening for you? What is your definition of hardening? Is what? Strengthening. Strengthening, yes, but how does it display on the curve? What? Exactly. So it means that you have your initial yield stress, elastic and plastic, and this yield stress increases with time. So when it is increasing, we call it hardening because your new yield stress is higher than the initial one. So what could be at the origin of hardening in materials? So for that, if we go at the scale of dislocations, there is one tool which is very important, and I think the experimentalists use that tool many times also to analyze their pictures. It is what we call the line tension analysis. Line tension analysis means if you take a piece of dislocation, so this is the black curve here is a piece of dislocation, this curve here. Just imagine that is a curved dislocation. And you compute the line tension, so you have some line energy, T. T is typically is due to the energy of the line, so the mu b squared over 2 pi 1 minus nu, this is this line energy. And this line tension, which is created on the dislocations, is compensated by the force you apply on it. If you push your dislocation with the red force here, which is called F, then your dislocation wants to bend like this, and you are elongating a bit your dislocation. So you are changing a bit your curvature. And out of that, we can make an equilibrium of this arc of dislocations, which is written here. So if you project that along the y-axis, this is what is done here, you know that the force F here, and so if we speak about work, so F dl, so the force applied on all this length, because I remember that the force is per unit of length. So F dl is a Newton, so a force in Newton, should be compensated by the projection of the two tensile forces here, which are the line tension here. And what is T? T, so it will be 2 times T sine d theta over 2. So this gives the projection of this force along the y-axis. Okay, everybody is clear? This is clear for you? So you compensate the F by those two projection of T along the y-axis. And T, as I said, is the line tension. So this is the line tension. We did it in the lectures yesterday. Is the energy, so mu b squared, 4 pi 1 minus nu, with a logarithmic term because it was integrated. Okay, so if you put that together, and if you replace the fact that the theta, r d theta is equal to dl, because it's a curved line, so r d theta is equal to your length of your arc. And if you say that F is equal to what you apply, tau b, you see the force is the shear times the Berger's magnitude, and you put that in the equations, you found that this, and finally you found that the curvature is mu b over twice your shear stress. So this gives you the curvature of a dislocation. And this is very important for TM, as I said, because when they take a picture of their dislocations, they see the curvature naturally. There is this 3D effect. We saw this morning that you don't know if your dislocation is like that or like this. So of course, because of the projection, the curvature may be modified slightly. But at least if you have a given curvature in TM, you can have an idea of the stress. You know that the curvature is reversed to the stress. So it gives you an idea of the local stress you may have. Although in the postmortem TM, not in situ you have it, of course, but in postmortem, when you don't have any load, locally you could see some curved dislocations. Why do you think they are curved, although you do not have any load? You have an idea why you do see dislocation curved without any applied load? Where is the stress coming from? Because if they are curved, it means that there is a stress. So where is that stress coming from? You have an idea? If you don't apply any load. The residual from what? What could create a residual stress? What? Temperature could be, yes. Dilatation temperature, that's a good point, yes. But more easier than that, the other dislocations. We saw this morning that when you have two dislocations together, they interact. So just imagine that there is a wall of dislocation, a pile-up, or maybe a dipole, like we see this morning at a given place. This dipole generates a stress somewhere. At that place, you have a stress. So if there's a dislocation here, it will be a little bit bent because of this stress locally. So not only the stress locally that you see is coming from what you apply, but also from what is internal. I call it internal stress. Okay. So internal stress include the thermal stresses, I agree, and also all the local stress you may have, but also dislocation segments somewhere else. Okay. So this stress is the total stress, what we call effective stress. So all the stress that could be active at that place where you have your dislocation. Okay. So that's a very important relationship for dislocations. This one, I put many lines out of it because this is very important. So the stress now is alpha, so it's the reverse of this, is alpha mu b divided by the length of your curved arc. So typically, if you have a Frank-Read source like this, so if you have a dislocation segment which is pin like this, the critical length for this segment to be active will be when the curvature is minimum. You see here, the curvature radius is quite big. You have a big radius. The more you curve your dislocation, the smaller the radius. Your radius decrease. So the stress increase. Because the radius, you agree that this radius is here. So it will be mu b over r. 2 is equal alpha mu b over r. I should write r also if you want. And when it is here, this radius is very small. When you increase more, your dislocation will be like this. The radius is again bigger, so the stress will be lower. The stress needed to move it will be lower. So first you start with a weak stress. It will increase to bow, and the critical stress will be when this shape is on your loop. And you can actually analytically see that because in practice the dislocation is not a circle. The dislocation is an ellipse. I showed you that yesterday. Because of the line energy, it is more like an ellipsoid, elongated toward the Burgers vector. So if you have the Burgers vector that way, you will more have something like this. Okay? But it will be still unstable, and when is it unstable? When those two derivatives will be parallel. So if you take those two derivatives here, when the two are parallel, it could be inclined. When they are parallel, the dislocation is unstable, so you reach the critical stress, the maximum stress to blow out your first dislocation, to create your first loop, okay? So this critical stress, here, for example, in the case of the circle, will be tau equal alpha mu b over the length, and the length is 2 times the radius. This length is the diameter, so 2 times the radius. So it will be 2 times alpha mu b over r, okay, typically, okay? So alpha is a prefactor, alpha, you have an idea, is mu b squared 4 pi, so this kind of thing, okay? So this critical strength is a very good approximation of what happened to your dislocation when you have defects. If you put defects in your material, the points here, that could be precipitated, that could be point defects, or whatever. Then your dislocation line, so here the line is coming from the right to the left. So the line is here, the dislocation comes. Oh no, it's here. It was here, but I don't like the curvature, so I thought it was the opposite. Okay, so it's here, so it's coming from the left to the right, and you see that it is pinned. Here I didn't put it at the point. We'll see why it could be at a distance from the point. And then it tried to pass through the obstacles. It bows like that, and when it is bowing, it is going away like this. And if you make a small drawing of what happened locally, you see that your defect is like this. Your dislocation is coming through the defect. If you put some line orientation of your dislocation, of course, at a given point, this will be bow out like this a lot. This, you have this orientation and like the opposite. So when those two merge, they will annihilate. This will annihilate like this. leaving some dislocation away. Okay? And then you have a residual loop, which is surrounding your obstacle. This is called the Noro-1 loop. This loop is a Noro-1 loop. Okay? So this is the mechanism. So I will show you many situations where this mechanism enter into play, and we will see together which mechanism I will speak about. So the first thing to do for the hardening, I will explain you what is the forest hardening. So forest hardening is when you have a dislocation meeting another dislocation. So the obstacle is not a precipitate, it is another dislocation. So sometimes they could meet, create some nodes. This morning we saw the junction. We saw that the low-Mercothrell lock was a big way to lock dislocation segments. So in that case, it will create a hardening because your dislocation will be pinned. So the dislocation hardening, it means that when you have many dislocations, we call it forest because they are like forest, like trees in a forest, and you go between the trees with an elastic. So you come with your friends, you take an elastic between you, and you try to go through the forest. It's very complicated to pass through the forest because of the trees. You will be totally attached to the trees. So this is what happens to the dislocation. You can see the movie here. This here I put many small dislocations which are all piercing the slip planes. So the slip plane is horizontal, dislocation is orange, and you can see that it tries to find a path between all those obstacles, and it's quite difficult for the dislocation line to pass through. And when it succeeds, then there is a yield stress which is computed. We can compute the stress needed to pass through all those obstacles. And those obstacles are defined by the density. I will go back to density tomorrow more. Dislocation density, I think also Professor Sudharaman explained you what is dislocation density, but I will write it again here. Dislocation density, rho, is equal, I wrote it here, the total length of dislocation divided by the total volume of the material, okay? Rho, so it will be in meters, and divided by the meter to the cubic. So the unit is meter minus 2. And you have an idea of how much you have dislocation in a typical material. What is the dislocation density? Who can give me a value? Yes, 10 to the 10, 10 to the 12. These are good numbers, yes, typically. It could be as low as 10 to the 8, I would say, for very good. Be careful of the units. So sometimes people write it in centimeters, so this change also for order of magnitude the scale. So be careful of that. But 10 to the 8, 10 to the 12 is normal value that we can find in TM observation. Yes, right. So let's put it 10 to the 10, and 10 to the 12 is maybe you can go upper, it could be 10 to the 13 and so on. Maybe tomorrow we'll compute some maximum value for dislocation density. So this dislocation density, out of that you can compute the average distance between the two forest nodes. Every time you have a given forest density, you can compute the distance between the obstacles, which is the reverse of the square root of rho. So 1 over square root of rho is L. So it means that the stress needed to pass through this obstacle is proportional to square root of rho. So tau is equal alpha mu b square root of rho. This is what we call the Cox law, Cox making law. So this is the forest hardening typical law, which is used in crystal plasticity. And tomorrow I will show you in detail a model based on that equation, typically. How we can, out of that, build a crystal plasticity model for FEM, finite element method. Okay? So this is this forest hardening. And how this is done, why do you have such a stiffness? It's not so easy. Why is it not so easy? Because actually not all dislocations are the same. If you put two dislocations in the same plane, typically you see that they don't form junction. So there is no forest hardening between two coplanar dislocations. And we saw in the Thomson tetrahedra that in a given slip plane, you have 3 slip systems. So typically you may move that dislocation and that one, so they do not form forest. It will be more like a junction, but not a forest, you see. So it's not so easy. Now if you put another one like this and this, then this is a forest interaction. But we saw that this morning that those two built a low-Mercothrell lock. In that case, it was sessile. So this is strong. We guess that this will be strong. But maybe in some other case, it will not be sessile. So we need to take into account all the possibilities for dislocation to interact together. And there are many. There are typically 12 by 12 slip systems that we should investigate. Each slip system, how it interacts with another slip systems. And you should, like that, create a 12 by 12 matrix of interaction. Okay? And now for each slip system, it's even more complicated because now you put two slip systems together, okay? But now, how do I put my dislocation? I have thousands of possibilities to put the line orientation of my dislocation. It could be edge or screw or any other mixed dislocation. And the same for the second plane. So it's a nightmare to investigate all those data. But we tried. A few years ago, we tried to investigate that using dislocation dynamics. So I put out here typically the slip system. So those are the 12 by 12 matrix. So I just recall you the Schmidt and Bose notation, which is here. So A, B, C, D, the letters are the planes. This is FCC. The Burgers vectors are the 6 here, like that. And out of this, we can, for example, for a given slip system B2, when it is interacting with A6, we see that here there is a J. J means that there is a glissile junction. Here, glissile, Ln, N is collinear. S is Lombard-Cottrell, what we saw this morning, and so on. So I have a first question for you. We can make this as a small exercise, because now you are expert of TM. Try to identify those interactions, typically for B4, because we worked a lot up to now on B4. B4 is the 111 bar 101 system. So B4, so we check that line, and please check with this summation of Burgers vectors how they could lead to, for example, Lombard-Cottrell in that case, Herf in that case. What is a Herf? Typically, I will ask you, what is a Herf lock? What is it? And what is the glissile, and so on. So let's check, for example, the first three here. Okay? So try to look at the local reaction between those two slip systems. Just speaking in terms of Burgers vectors, you sum up the Burgers vectors, and you see what is the new Burgers vector. Okay? So let's start, for example, by B4 A6. Okay? I will try to plot it here, but try it by yourself on your table quickly. It will not take more than 5 minutes, but I think it's a good exercise to check this junction mechanism. So I am in the case. I will try to plot again the slip system interaction. So those are my two planes, like this. And I assume that one is constant. Typically, this is the 1, 1, 1. So this is my B, B4, and B4. And the 4 is bar 101. So B4 and B, bar 101. So now I ask you what happens if I put another dislocation in the slip system, for example, A6. So A will be bar 111. And the Burgers vector B2 now, B2, yeah, will be 6, and 6 is 110. So of course you can imagine all the line possibility. You can have minus or plus the Burgers vectors, because this depends only on your line orientation. So if you see that the interaction doesn't give a junction, you can reverse the sign and see if in that case it does create a junction or not. Okay. So what do you find? If you sum up the two Burgers vectors, what does it do? B1 plus B2, what does it give at the interface? You have bar 1 plus 1, 0. 0 plus 1, 1. 1 plus 1. 1 plus 0, I'm sorry. So B3 here, in that case, will be equal to, so we said 0, 1, and 1. Okay? Yes, 0, 1, 1. So now if you plot your Thomson tetrahedra out of it, we need to check whether this Burgers vector is inside one of those two planes. How is located this Burgers vector compared to the two planes? So we should now use our Thomson tetrahedra as before. So we again have this 111 plane. So I take it as the green color of the yellow color of the one I gave you, 111 on the bottom. This is bar 111, which is the green. So it means that the Thomson tetrahedra, what is those two letters? Can you find it? What are the two here? This one is, and this one. G? No, we don't have G in Thomson tetrahedra. You see, I put it here. This is the 111, which is bar 1, bar 1, bar 1. Okay, I put the opposite because I put it on it. So what is the... This is the 1, 1 bar 1 bar 1. Yes, it's all the opposite sign. Okay, or 1 bar 1 bar 1, if I put it that way. So here is the green and is the yellow. I put it here. So what is the line here? And what are the letters? What is this letter? C. You agree that this is C. This is A. And this is D. Okay? Just to be sure that you have the same as mine. So A, B, C, D. This is how it looks like if I'm not wrong. You see this is 1 bar 1 bar 1 coming out on the top. And 1, 1, 1 here with minus if I put my Thomson tetrahedral like that. Okay? Do you have this in view? You can see that with your tetrahedra. So I said that here, on that dislocation, I have the 101. What 101 was, which dislocation was it? 101 was DA. What was DA? Okay. No, 101. This was DA on that gate. So what I am doing? CA. So this one was 101. So yes, it's DA. What am I doing? It's S6, we said. S6. Bar 1, bar 1. So it's DC. This one is DC. So this one is DC. Okay. And the horizontal one is 101. And this one was 101. Was it 101? We said B4. No, before is bar 101. Why did I put this here? I don't know where I took that. Ah, it's bar 101, I see here, bar 1, yes. Bar 101, okay, so this is better. So bar 101, which is DB, okay? So you have DB, DC like this, and no, it could not be DB, but it's C. I think I'm starting to be tired, right? So this bar 101, what you have is CB, yes. I had it and I just wrote it. CB, okay. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so you have CB and DC. So what could it give? DC plus CB. What is the reaction? DC plus CB will be DB. And how is DB vectors compared to the two planes? It's out of the plane. It's out of the plane, so this, it's, what? And this will create sterod if we took the splitting as we saw this morning, yes, indeed. And this is the Lomer-Cottrell log. This is the Lomer-Cottrell log, okay? The Lomer-Cottrell happened here. So this was the S here, as we say, it's Lomer-Cottrell log, typically what we saw this morning, okay? So we can do now, typically, we can try to look at the Earth and the glacial if you want. So the Earth will be the same before, so before I don't change it. And I just change the second plane here. So my Thomson tetrahedra will not have the same letters. And I change that into the second one in my list. Second one in my list is A3, so now I try to make it seriously. So bar 111. So bar 111. So I want to check if this is the sign or the opposite. So this is the 111. I take it like this. I'm looking for the bar 111. Bar 111 is this guy here. So what is these letters? Now you know the mechanism. What are the two letters of my Thomson tetrahedra? What is this letter here? See this one? C, this one A, and this one D, and this one B. Okay? Everybody agree with that? Here we still have CB. It doesn't change. And we just change the one of this guy here. And this guy, now the Burgers vector for the Earth will be the 3. So it's 101. So the 101 is DA. Exactly, this one, DA. So DA is here, and the second one is CB, which is there. What do you see between DA and CB? They have something strange. So DA and CB, typically, what do you see in your Thomson tetrahedra? DA and CB, you can look at them like this. What are they? They are very special vectors. they are the only one to be like this. What? No, this was before. This was the previous example. Now B3 here is written here. Is the B3 is 101. Okay. B3. The resulting one. Yes, we can have a look if you want. So CB, you say it's bar 101 plus the second one, which is DA, and the DA was the 4. The bar 1, the A3, 101. This gives 0, 0, 2. Okay? So this is a dislocation which is typically not in a plane. Okay, it's a 002 dislocations, which is not in the plane. But the interaction is a specific interaction. If you look, I was just not looking at that. I wanted to have a look at those orientations. What do you think about those two vectors? What is their specificity? They are not like those two typically, or those two here. They are, I'd like to have this word. Somebody should say it. If you don't, I will say, what is the dot product of the two? What is it? -1 plus 0 plus 1, 0. So they are orthogonal. Those vectors are perpendicular. And you can see it clearly on your it's 3D perpendicular, of course, but they are perpendicular. So those interactions is called the orthogonal interaction. So it's a specific one. It's something which is sessile. You see, it looks like sessile. It's not in any of the two planes, the resulting intersection. But the interaction is, and we'll see later on, weak because of the interaction of orthogonal vectors. The stress field will be weaker than the Lombard-Courtrai typically. So it's a weak junction, but it is a junction. We call it the Earth lock. Okay, the Earth junction. Earth junction is this thing when the two Burgers vectors are orthogonal. Okay, so it is less strong as the Lombard-Courtrai. I will show you later on why it is less strong. The glissile, and I think we will stop it here because it's quite long and I'm tired. I'm doing a lot of mistakes. So I will try to do the last one now. Hopefully I will succeed the first time. So I keep the same B1, and now I'm looking for the third case. The third case is here, it's the glissile. So you take A2, A is bar 111, so the same plane, and 2 is O bar 11. What is O bar 11? So it was actually the same tetrahedra, or O bar 11. So 111. It's always with A. Actually, here I'm always investigating the same plane. I should not remove it. So the vector is always the same. The tensor tetrahedra is always located at the same way, like this. So C, A, D, and B. This remains the same. I should not have removed it because we are always dealing with the A plane. It's A6, A3, A2, so it's always the same interaction. So we are always looking at the same. We just change the Burgers vector. And so the new Burgers vector, what is it? The glissile is the 2. So it's O bar 11. So O bar 11, which one is it? O bar 11 is? Where is O bar 11? Don't give me the letters. CA, yes. So this is the O bar 11. So this dislocation now has this Burgers vector here, CA, and this dislocation has CB, this guy here. If they have this line, there is no creation of a junction, but if you reverse it, AC plus CB will give AB. So AB, where is it located? In the horizontal plane. So it means that the junction you will create will be able to move in the horizontal plane. So it's not a lock. This junction can move. It's what we call a glissile junction now. You see now, here I think we have seen there is one more type, which is the collinear junction. Collinear is here, where you have the same Burgers vector. So in the case now two dislocations meet and they have the same Burgers vector, then the junction has 0 length because you sum up the same Burgers vector, it could give 0. Although they are not in the same plane, it means that one is here, one is there, they share this Burgers vector. When they intersect, the junction is 0 Burgers vector. B1 plus minus B1 will give 0. Okay. So that's the last case where you have what we call the collinear junction, C, which is a strong junction actually because there is no junction. It has removed the junction part. You just split your two. It's annihilation, yes. It's a kind of annihilation, but not in the plane. It's out of plane. Okay. Out of plane annihilation, yeah. Okay. And maybe I can speak a bit on this collinear junction. I wanted to go fast, but it's not a good idea. This is my default. I always want to go fast, and I try to go slowly now. Okay. So if I want to do the collinear junction, it will look like that. It means that you now have a dislocation here with this Burgers vector here, this Burgers vector, this one, and another one here with the same Burgers vector. And when they meet, if I introduce a dislocation in my simulation, like that, for example, if I put a dislocation pin here, like that, okay, and I put a green dislocation here, when they cross, when they will meet, they will try to, so you have this thing, they try to create a junction. This one is going up, this one is going down, this one is going on the back. This is my junction. But the junction now will be equal B1 plus B1, the same. So equal to 0, if you put a minus here. Okay. So this will be removed. You don't have the junction. So it means that your segment, which has a given orientation, will now be connected to its neighbor, tac, and this segment will be connected here. So you have removed the part of the line. So you have something which is strong because this point is mandatory to move along this line. So now this point is not free to glide in all the possible planes as before. It has to glide on the common point between the two lines. So this is strong. This is something which is very important in material. The collinear junction is very strong in the hardening mechanism, just because this spinning point is now no more free to move in the plane. It has to be always in the 1,1,0 direction, corresponding to the Burgers vector of the line. Actually, this is exactly what happens in the corner of a prismatic loop. Yesterday we spoke about prismatic loop. This is a corner of a prismatic loop, this. You have your Burgers vector and the two edge segments which can glide. This is just a part of the prismatic loop. Excuse me? Kink what? Oh, cross kink in BCC. Yes, exactly. Yes, yes. Cross kink is exactly this. When you have typically you can have this thing, and this looks like cross kink now. Yes, you're right. If this is the Burgers vectors B, you are dealing with BCC. You have one kink which is going in 1,1,1 plane, another kink going in another 1,1,1 plane, and here you have the two edge segments which built a cross kink. Yes, what I explained yesterday as the open source mechanism. You're right. It is exactly that. Yes, except that this was for FCC. So FCC we don't speak about kink. Kink is more like for BCC. For FCC we don't say kink. We speak about collinear junction. Okay, but that's true. This is the. Okay, so I think we spent some time on that, but it's good. I suggest that next week we can try to set up such a few junctions in the code with the DD code. We'll build it. Okay, we'll see how it works and see if the code is okay to reproduce the glissite, the Lomer, the Herf, and so on. We'll see each of them if you want. Maybe not each of them because you see it takes time, but maybe a few of them. Okay. So you see that they are different. So there is no reason that the tau equal alpha mu b over L should be the same for any subsystems, because they're all different. So it's impossible to have this thing. So it's not like that. So we try to do that with the numerical, with computers, let's say, several ways. So in 2001, with my colleague Laurent Dupuis. Laurent Dupuis, by the way, is the guy who is developing now NuModis. So the NuModis guy, if you want to have details of the code, he's the guy in charge of that. He's the expert of C++. I am not. I am an old guy in the Fortran computing. You know? He's the C++ guy. So he's developing now NuModis full time in an atomic energy commissariat in Saclay in Paris. So in 2001, he was my postdoc student, and we worked on the line tension model. And so typically we were looking at a junction. So this is my junction here, you see. So here I have one arm, a second arm which is here, and they are close to meet at the intersection between the two planes. And we try to form this junction, as I showed you before, like this. So here we define some points, some nodes, and we also define initially some angles. So you have an angle C1, okay, and an angle psi2 in the second plane, which define the angle between the common lines and the dislocation line. So this is what the two parameters we can vary to see all the line orientations if they want to form or not a junction in space, okay? And then later on we can compute some angle, but this is just for strength. I will show you later. So now out of that, what we do, every time there is a junction, so a triple node, we call it a triple node here between three lines, you have a triple node. We can sum up the free forces due to the line tension, as before, the 2t squared over 2 mu 1 minus mu d. So you compute the force, F1, F2, F3. You sum up the free, and you see if the nodes wants to glide or not. Very easy code. You can do that in MATLAB. There is no DD simulation here. Here there is no internal stresses. This is purely line tension thing. So it's not just about line energy. It's just line energy conservation. So does it worth to create that junction or not? Is the energy of this line smaller than the two? This is what the code is doing finally. We are comparing mu b squared, mu b1 squared, plus mu b2 squared, when the two lines are separated, versus the fact that they merge, so mu b1 plus b2 squared. If b1 plus b2 squared is lower, then the dislocation will move, that will create a junction. That's the analysis, more or less, this is what we put. So let's run the code like this. So this is what it gives for the Lombard-Cottrell lock. You remember, this is what we saw this morning. This morning we formed this lock. So here I show you the same dislocation junction between the Lombard-Cottrell as we showed here previously. So this is molecular dynamics. I had a question this morning. How is it when at the atomic level, how the dislocation core interact and so on and so on. You see how it looks like? So initially you had the two arms, the blue and the red one, and they are pinned at the extremity, and you let them relax. And you can see that here you have a partial splitting. So this is a stacking fault here, BNF. Here there is something which is, you have to tell me what it is. It is? Sterod, yes, I had a question. Locate the sterod evidence this morning tutorial. It is here. This is the sterod, yes indeed. Here you have I put it here. This is my sterod, okay? The sterod is here, and this is the pure Lombard-Cottrell junction, as we saw this morning. So the sterod is there, and at the opposite side, if you do the same job as we did this morning here, you can do it on the tail partials. You'll see that there is no sterod at that place. There is a constriction, and the dislocation merge like this. So here the nodal code, so typically what you will get with NeuModis will give that. The MD code will give this, so you see the partial splitting, which are very much similar. Typically you have this tangential here, and acute here, acute here. So it means that they match very well, very, very well. And although my stupid edge screw model, my stupid 3Ds, this is 3Ds, the code I'm using every day, my old code, do the same. You can see that this is tangent, and this is acute, similar to there. Except that here there is something I call a sausage. It looks like a sausage, you see here. It's a sausage because if you zoom on it, it's just the superposition of two lines. The edge screw model, there is no junction. We don't create triple nodes and merge and create junctions. We don't do that. We just superimpose lines, which is not good. It's not good because typically, among the junctions I just showed you here, there is one that I will never be able to do with my 3D code. Which junction I cannot do with such a code, do you think? We saw the glycine, we saw the earth, we saw the Lombard-Cottrell, and we saw the collinear. One of these I cannot do with my old edge screw model. Which one? Since at the junction I will have two lines superimposed. And the pink line typically is confined into the one-on-one plane. It can never change. It can cross-slip, but it cannot change its Burgers vector. It's impossible in my code. A Burgers vector is continuous among a line, and there is no junction, so I don't have triple point. Here it's continuous in the blue line. So here, this is B1, this is B2, and here I have B1, B2. So macroscopically, it's like B3, but I don't have exactly B3. I have B1 plus B3, B2. So which junction I cannot handle in DD with this code? Which one? The junction I cannot handle with 3Ds is the glycyl junction. Because the glycyl junction here, I should be able to change this dislocation into a new one for which the Burgers vector will be in the same plane. So it means that in my line here, I will have a change of Burgers vector so that it can glide in the plane. It's not possible in my code today. Today, this pink line will remain there and will be able only to move in the initial plane it is, not in another one. The blue can stay in the horizontal one, but not with the red. So it will not be a junction. So the glycine junction is not accessible with this edge screw model. This is why actually it motivated us to develop the nodal code. So this is why we developed pneumodis, just to have this glycyl loop. Okay. But don't worry, in many cases, we don't need that glycyl interaction to find many interesting mechanisms, and I will show you in 2 days from now, in fatigue, typically, there is not such a junction, and the DD code is able to teach a lot of things. Okay? So you see this junction? This is the Lomer-Cottrell. Yeah? The steroid is, the steroid, the Burgers vector is this, but this is out of plane. The DC is this guy here. The steroid of your junction, Lomer-Cottrell lock, is this guy. It's a third of this guy. You know, the Lomer-Cottrell is the full guy here, out of the plane, and the steroid is a third of it. It's A over 6 times the perfect Burgers vectors. You see? It's not A over 2, it's A over 6. So it's a third of the pure DC. This was DC, so it's a third of DC. So it's not in the plane. So the dislocation line is here, but the Burgers vector is out of the 2 planes. It's in the third plane. It's this guy here. Okay? So the full set here is sessile. This delta gamma and DC, they cannot move. Both are sessile. Okay? Okay, so this is just to illustrate you a little bit about junction. So now we can go further. Now that we are able to form a junction, I don't have the curves. Oh, I forgot the curves. The curves disappeared. Oh yes, something disappeared. Okay. So usually I would have loved to show you here the length of the junction depending on the angle. So I don't have it here. Well, anyway, just imagine that we are able, of course, out of this model, we are able to visualize, to compute the length of this dislocation junction versus the parameters that we put in the model. So these angles, typically, you change your angles, you measure the new length, you change the angle, you measure the new length, and that way you can have a description of all the possibilities for the dislocation to form a junction or not. Because some cases, if we reverse the sign as we did here, if we take the opposite sign, typically, so it means that phi is bigger than 90 degrees, for example, so you change your dislocation sign, then they will repel. They will not form a junction, so they will be repelling dislocations. So for the same dislocation interactions, same Burgers vectors, some are attractive and some could be repulsive. It just depends on the line orientation. Okay? So this is for the length. And now as soon as you have created your dislocation junction like this, you can break the junction, because the idea is to measure the strength of the junction. So what you do is now you take your junction and you apply a shear stress S1 in the first slip system and the shear stress S2 in the second slip system, so along the Burgers vectors. So this is my S1, my S2. Those are the 2 stress quantities, 2 shears that I can plot. So typically, if I apply a pure shear here and 0 stress there, I will move on that curve like this, toc, toc, toc. This will move a bit my junction. It will be moving, and at one time the junction is disappeared, is broken. So I save the point, and this gives me a point here on the line. I can do that with such a path, such a path, such a path, and then I can plot what I call the yield curve for a given junction. And here I did it for Lomer-Cottrell, glycyl, earth, and you have all the curves here, and you can visualize which is stronger than which. And you can see that the Lomer-Cottrell is very strong, the glycyl is here, and the earth is there, is very weak. Just because of the local energy, the earth is the weakest one compared to the free. The collinear, if we could do that, is very big. It's very big, but I would not call it a junction because there is no Burgers vector remaining, so it's not a junction really. So it was not studied in that paper. Okay. So this was for different angle of the psi. So psi is this initial angles I defined in the previous slide. So it's negative or positive. You don't have the same shape, but again the ranking is the same. Lomer is higher, glycyl, and then earth. Okay. So you see that now we can rank the slip system interactions. You have many parameters. You have a matrix, and within the matrix you have several parameters where you can specify the collinear, the Lomer-Cottrell, the glycyl, and then the earth. And this is from the biggest and to the weakest junction. Okay. Now this was done also by DD simulation. I showed you that with molecular dynamics. So this is a DD simulation with my stupid edge screw model 3D. So you see the 2 lines, the superposition with the sausage, as I told you before. This is the Lomer-Cottrell lock. We don't see a lot the dark blue line, but there is a dark blue line. Do you see it a bit? Yes, there is dark blue here and there. And then here you can see the stress map, as I showed you. So here is S1, here is S2. This modeling, this animation are available on the website. You can have a look in 3D on numodis.com. You will see this thing. So here, typically, I apply a pure shear on S1. So S1 is the blue line. You can see that the blue line is bent. The yellow is not applied, is not loaded. It just follows because of local interaction, but there is no applied load on the yellow. Whereas here, the yellow is loaded and the blue also. So they both are loaded at the same value. This is 45 degrees. So S1 is equal to S2. Do you understand what I call S1, S2? It's my two shear stresses, okay? One on the blue, this is on the blue, and this is on the yellow, okay? Here, for example, I only pull on yellow. You see that the yellow is unzipping, the blue is just following. And here I do the same, for the two are moving the same way. When S1 is negative and S2 is positive, you have the same behavior like that. So here I increase the stress, step by steps, and I measure the stress when it breaks. The same way as I did with the line tension model, except that here I have one more ingredient, which is the internal stress. I take also into account not only the energy, but also the fact that the two dislocations interact with their stress fields. Okay? So this we will do it next week. Okay? We will create a junction and break it. You see, we create and we break. This is life. Yes? Yes? Yeah.
The smallest stress values.
The Earth one, yes. Yeah.
But the potential vector for the Earth lock is 002, we calculated.
Yes, 002, yeah.
That's a very high energy.
Yeah, but it does form in some case anyway. There is.
Is it because of that fact that the stress value is very small?
I would say it's also because of the Burgers vector, which are perpendicular. This is the main reason of that. So now I agree that because of the energy, so this guy will be 002. Okay, so the energy will be 4 uv squared. Okay, so 002 squared. You see, the energy is mu b squared, alpha mu b squared. Okay, so it will be this guy will be equal to 4. Yes, 4. Okay, and if you have the 112, 110 plus the other one which was 110 family, let's say, the energy here is 1. So it's square root of 2. So it's 2 plus 2. Okay, so it's equivalent. So there is not a big gain in energy to build that junction. It's equivalent. They just want to form because locally the line tension wants them to push. But macroscopically, if we just look at that, which is wrong. This is when we do that, there is something which is missing, is that alpha is not the same for each arm. You need to take into account the anisotropy of the line. Some of the part will be edge, some of the part will be more screw. So because of that, there is a small change of energy. So finally, this is favorable, but very weakly favorable. Oh, oui, it's a lock. It is a lock. It doesn't move. Like the Lombard-Cottrell. Lombard-Cottrell is also cannot move.
So then the stress value should be higher?
No, because the length is small. The Earth lock will be small. This is the slide which is missing. I don't show you here the length. Or I can show you this thing if you want. The length of the junction is very small. Here, typically, you can have an idea of what. But this is only the Lombard lock. I have another slide I can show you maybe after the lectures if you don't want to waste time. So here, I changed this angle phi 0. So it's the same for the two. And I plot the length of the dislocation, the junction, here, this length, if I change phi 0. So here, if you increase up to, let's say, 70 degrees, you still find a junction. If you go here, you don't have junction, they will repel. Okay? And on the negative, it's not really symmetric. You see that this is more, with the line tension, it is symmetric if you take the isotropic line tension. If you take the anisotropic line tension, as I told you, taking into account the character of the lines, then you have a dissymmetry. It's higher here than there. The same as what you observe with DD. With the dislocation dynamics, you have this blue curve here. Okay. And if you plot here, out of that plot, the Earth will be like that. So the length is very small. You have a small length. This is the size for which you have a length is very tiny zone, you see. So as soon as you push on it, your angle will change, and then your dislocation is destroyed very quickly. So it's very weak junction because of that. Okay? Yes?
Sir, in interaction matrix, we see that dislocations which are not on the same slip system are 0. Dislocations which are on the same slip system.
It's not 0, but it's so weak, the coplanar. You mean the coplanar here, I didn't speak about coplanar. You mean when you have the two on the same slip plane or same slip system? Same slip system, yeah. So it's this is what we call the self interaction, yes. Okay. This is the weakest, yes.
In crystal plasticity, we model this self-hardening as well.
Yes.
So there will be some interaction which will occur in this same slip system.
Yes, sure.
So why it is not considered here? It is taken as zero.
Yeah, because actually, again, here the junction will be a zero Burgers vector. If you have the self-slip system, so same Burgers vector, if they want to meet and form a junction, it means that B1 minus B1. If you put B1 plus B1, it repels. So it will be an annihilation, actually. So annihilation, do you call it a junction or not? It is controversial. For me, this is...
Hardening will be taking place due to these two dislocations which are on same slip.
Yes, sure, yes.
Is it considered somewhere at other places in dislocation dynamics?
Yes, I will show you tomorrow the law from FEM where we have all the set of parameters. Usually for this self-annihilation, we put it as zero. It's a very low value. We don't take that into account. The reason for that is that there is a very rare chance for the two dislocations to interact. You see, you don't have many planes with many different dislocations. If they are in the same plane, usually they come from the same source. So it's not interaction of two sources. If one source is going one way, the second source will go the same way, you see. So it's not a junction. I would not call this a junction, maybe. You see, it's not a hardening mechanism, at least. You see what I mean? I can make a picture maybe in 2D to explain you why we don't say that this is a hardening mechanism. If I do that in 2D, so what you think about is this kind of thing. You have a dislocation here and another there with the same Burgers vector. Let's say that this is B. So if they expand with the stress field, it means that they have the same orientations. Otherwise, one will shrink and one will expand. If they expand, so now those two will meet, and very quickly you will have something like that. Okay? This is what I told you when I say it's annihilated, and this is, do you call this a junction or not? Anyway, this is not a strong, this is even actually soft. It's a softening mechanism because this is very easy now to move. So it's not a hardening mechanism. So usually we put zero for this interaction because of that, you see? And now if you put that in 2D, it means that here typically you have this, here you have these dislocations, and at the middle you had this dislocation here plus this one, which annihilate. So you have something which is free to move. There is no hardening here. The stress is even decreasing, I would say. So for me, the hardening coefficient here is zero. Okay?
So if initial microstructure is there, in that I populate with graduate sources which are lying on same system. So whether hardening will occur in that or not?
If they're on the sub-C system, I would say no. I would say no. Unless you have some finite volume with boundaries and where you have pileups. But it's not dislocation interaction, it's just pileup of dislocation against a boundary.
Suppose it is PBC, then?
PBC, periodic boundary condition, no, so they will self-annihil. So, and PBC for that is a very bad thing because if you put only dislocation on the same slip systems, if you don't have cross-slip, so they remain on the same slip system, you put periodic boundary condition in your box, then your dislocation move, enter again, move and enter, and after a given number of turns, it will come back with itself by periodicity, and then it will auto-annihilate. And at the end of the day, you will have zero dislocation in your box when you put a single one. So you can start with a source, you can run it, it will take maybe 1 minute, and then you have zero dislocation, because it is self-annihilated with itself. So to avoid that, people put some non-dimensional size of the box, so that it will make many turns before coming back in the same plane. That's the way to do it. But then, because of that, if you make many turns to come back in the same plane, you will have a large probability to have two planes very close, one to each other, so then you will create dipoles, which is worst. So either you have a softening, when you have no change of your plane, or you have dipole, which is very strong hardening. So it's not good periodic conditions for a single slip system. So I will prefer to have a bigger box to avoid this self-annihilation, typically.
We will not be able to go into plastic with that.
Yes, yeah. Okay? Oh, I like your question, it's nice. Okay, so I come back to my slide. I will add this, the curves in my PDF, so you will have it. Okay, and I come back to this one. So you see this, and you see how we destroy, and you can see the mechanism. So the mechanism to destroy a junction is not breaking. It's not a junction which suddenly break. It's what we call unzipping. You see, you unzip your dislocation junction. You see that it is moving like that, unzipping slowly, up to the time it will be a zero-length junction. Okay? That's it? It's okay? So the conclusion for that, and tomorrow we'll see a bit more on this in chapter 3. Not all dislocations are equivalent, we saw that. For FCC, there is theoretically 12 by 12 steep systems. For each of them, we should account for all the possible orientations. So this is more complexity. So you have a huge statistics. So usually we don't do that one by one dislocation. We put many dislocations together and we make a kind of averaging of the two system interaction with dislocation dynamics. And this gives an average coefficient of interactions between two steep systems. I don't know if I was clear, you see. So you put many dislocations of a given system with all possible orientations, another possibly random spread of dislocation on another steep systems, and you let them move. So you measure how much stress you need to push in order to pass through the forest dislocation, and this gives you an average value for the strength. You have tau versus dislocation density. And this is how people do to measure this matrix. Okay, and tomorrow I will show you that for the crystal plasticity model. Okay, for junction. Is it 1 hour already? No? What time is it? No, when did we start? I don't remember when we start.
We have 10 minutes.
Well, more 10 minutes, okay, that's good. So now, this was the first obstacle, the first source of hardening I wanted to show you. This was the junction, which is the main one, I guess, for the large straining experiments. Another one is the precipitate. So the precipitate, you have here a modeling of precipitate in 3Ds. You can see a blue line, maybe it's clear, you don't see the clear line here, passing through this particle, and this particle here is an obstacle, so it cannot be crossed by the dislocation, and you can see the OR1 loops, which are deposited surrounding the particle every time the dislocation is periodic, here again. So you can see many loops are deposited surrounding the particle. So here I just want to point out one also feature, which is quite important, is that if this precipitate, for this to happen, this happens for coherent or incoherent precipitates. For every case, you have some interface stress, I would say, to shear the particle. Although if it's coherent, you may shear it, but at the beginning, you have some critical stress to allow the shear to process. So this is the case, and I just wanted to highlight the fact that when you have a defect, for example, a particle like this, and when you have deposited a line surrounding the particle, so this was my dislocation incoming like this, it came through like that, so this deposited a line which is that orientation, and then you have your remaining dislocation coming in there. You see that if I shear my system, I am shearing the system, so this dislocation here wants to go on the right, this dislocation here wants to go also on the right, this wants to go on the left. You see what I mean? So maybe I'm too fast again. I'm too fast. If I want, I have one dislocation which is like this. I push it on the left, and there is a particle here. Okay, the next picture will be the dislocation will bow out like that, around the particle, like that. So it will be like this, okay? So here the dislocation is up, okay? And at the end, you will have, at the end of the day, when it has crossed the particles, you will have your residual dislocation, which is that one here. And my dislocation, which has left, is like this. I applied the shear so that it will move from right to left. It means that this guy will move to the right. This guy will move to the left. So it means that this particle is shrinked. It is like, you see, it wants to be sheared. You see, this mechanism, or one mechanism, will be very strong for the particle. If this is a shearable particle, it will be very easy to shear, just because those loops want to shear it naturally. Because of the applied stress, it's even worse. You apply toward the shearing of the loop, just because of the line orientation. Okay? So this OR1 mechanism is very important for the shearing process of the loop. Okay? And if you have a second loop deposited, it's even worse, because you have a pile-up effect. So the stress here on the first dislocation is even higher than the applied one. It's the number of the applied stress times the number of loops deposited. So it's very easy to shear particles if you have a couple of dislocations surrounding it, because of this mechanism. It's just a geometrical effect, but usually we neglect this effect. Okay? Just because the applied stress wants the dislocation to shrink. Okay? So this hardening also can be measured. It can be measured like that. So this is what you can find in textbook. The length now, alpha mu b over L. The L will be the square root of the number of particles times their diameter. So it means that the length now, the stress is alpha mu b. Alpha is not the same. It's a new alpha. It's not the same as the Forest hardening. It's a new coefficient. Mu b square root of nd. And typically, alpha is about 0.8 for infinitely rigid sphere, so non-shareable particles. Okay? But this is not enough. I will show you later. You need to account for other things when you have a precipitate. What does the precipitate create in your matrix? Yes, internal stresses. Why? Why do you have internal stresses? Exactly. So this is the case of coherent particles, typically, or elastic mismatch if there is not the same expanding modulus, the dilatation modulus. But typically, if it's coherent particle, this is a big problem because you have coherency between your matrix and your particles. So this will create a stress field surrounding the particle. And then the dislocation will feel that stress field. So it will be affected by that. This is what I will call the misfit stress. The misfit stress is a very important process, yes. Another important process is the stiffness of the particle. Although you don't have misfit, just imagine you have the same lattice spacing between the particle and the matrix, so you don't have some distortion, no elastic fields. If the elastic moduli are not the same between the matrix and the particle, there will be an effect on the dislocation. Can you feel it or not? I will show you again the 2D plot to feel this, and then I will show you the analytical results. Just imagine you have your dislocation coming toward a particle. This is a particle, a hard particle. Hard. Okay? So this particle do not want to deform. It's like Young modulus is 10 times the one of the matrix. If my dislocation comes here, the dislocation is just distorting the network like this. Okay? It is distorting now. When it comes here, it will not be able to distort the network anymore because now this will be very rigid. So locally, the dislocation will be here, and the plane cannot be distorted, so it will be like this. So the stress field is modified. This is what we call an image force. The dislocation will feel some image force due to the change of moduli. Just because this is not the same medium as that one, there is an image force, a back force on your dislocation. I will explain you why it is called image force, which is a bad word actually. Image force on the dislocation that will push the dislocation out of the hard particle. Okay? You get the idea? So this is important. And now if you do the same, but you have a free surface, something soft, a void, typically that this is a void. It attracts, yes, it's a void. So the void is soft, it can deform very easily. When your dislocation comes, this bending of the thing will be even more bent like that than expected. So the dislocation will move easily to the void, so it will be attracted by the void. And this is the change of, it's exactly a change of elastic moduli. This is a zero modulus compared to a bulk modulus. So you see that the change of elastic moduli also play a role when you have obstacles. And this is something that we need to implement in DD if we want to take into account this effect. Okay? So I think that was important to stop here, and I will show you how we do that. Yes?
The change in the elastic moduli is continuously increasing rather than the sudden change.
Yes. Or the same, you will have some image forces for sure. It will be less sharp, I would say, so you will feel it maybe even before. I don't know how to compare it with and without let's say the diffusion of the interface, but still you will have image forces for sure. For sure. So it means that your dislocation will remain a little bit, if it's harder particle, it will be remain repelled a little bit compared to if the modulus were the same. You see, for sure. And I will show you here some calculation on that. Just before, I will show you for the void. So it fits a cavity. The formula is the same formula, because you should ask, why is it harder for the void? You have any idea why is it harder? I told you that it will attract the particles, so it's not a hardening mechanism, it's a softening mechanism. So why is it harder here? You see it's harder, but very low. It's 0.7 in place of 0.8. But there is a hardening effect. You have any idea why? Why, when you put void, it's harder than without voids? That's strange, no? Why is it like that? Exactly. Dislocation comes into the void, it's attracted, and it is pinned there. Now you need to take the dislocation out of the void. So you need to create fresh dislocation length. And this has a cost. You need to create a step on the void, actually, to make the shear step of the void, plus the dislocation length. So this has a small cost, which is 0.16, typically in this factor. So it's not before the void interaction that there is a problem, it's after. To release from the void, it costs some energy. which is because of the shearing process and the dislocation length you need to create again. Okay? So it is indeed a hardening mechanism, the void, but very weak. Okay? And then again, the main difference is that in that case here, when it is hard, you will have ORO1 loop deposited. Here, for the void, of course, you don't have ORO1 loops. It's totally absent. There is not such a mechanism. Okay? I put also some other things if you are interested with a nuclear energy problematic, typically. If you are looking for loops, stacking for loops or tetrahedra, then there is no analytical formula yet available. You need to have some molecular dynamics simulation or DD simulations to take out the value of alpha, depending on your size, the location of your loops, and so on. Again, you need to do some computing to have an idea of that. This has been done. You can find many papers on that. Okay? So here, I showed you how this is done in 3D or in NADD code. How do you introduce a precipitate in the DD code? First thing to do is to introduce what we call facets. Facets is just a set of nodes. For example, here I have 4 nodes connected together, and I define some orientation. So I define a normal, plus and minus the normal. And I say, okay, these facets, now for the dislocation is an obstacle. So when a dislocation comes in front of the facet, like here is a set of facets, it will be able to pass through the facet if the local stress is above a critical value. So there is a critical value associated to the facet. So actually we have 2 critical values, one to pass through in that direction and one to pass through the other direction. So that way you can have some easy shear, and then you can be trapped you can make a trap in your dislocation dynamics code. We call it a trap. If you want not the dislocation to come back when you reverse the loading, for example, you can make a trap. They can cross easily and they cannot come back. Or you can make some particle shearing like that, where you have some surface energy which are built every time you have a shear of your particles. Anything can be done. But it is a local rule. We call it a local rule because it's nothing that we put ad hoc in the code. So we introduce the facets to mimic this obstacle effect. Okay, so that's what I call the order 0 precipitate, because this is just an obstacle. And these dislocations are just locked, they cannot cross the interface, or after a given time they can cross. Maybe here, I don't remember if I have a shear process. Here maybe, for example, if I say that the shear stress is 100 or 200 megapascal, after a given amount of pile-up dislocation, you could see one which is shearing the particles. Like that. So that's the order 0 precipitate, just as an obstacle. But as we said just before, some things are missing. We don't have the misfit stress, okay, and we don't have the change of elastic moduli. So how to do that? This can be, so this is, again, is without. I don't know if you see the particles. This was the simulation where you have random particles here, which are put in your simulation box. And out of that, you can measure, as in the textbook, for example, the effect on the shear stress, shear strain curve of the volume fraction. So you just put more particles, the same size. If you have a low volume fraction, a bigger one, and a bigger one. So here you see 2 things. First, you can see that you have a yield stress, which is not much depending on that. Here, at least, there is not a big difference between the 2 yield stress, just because they do not encounter here, I think, no, it's here, yes. So here it's the initial stress. So this is the shear stress we should compare, but they are comparable. Let's say this is not a big deal. There is not a big issue about the yield stress, but there is a big change in the hardening slope. Do you know why the hardening slope is much different here? For the highest volume fraction, the hardening is a lot higher than for the lowest, just because of the number of ORO1 loop. Since you have more ORO1 loops for the higher concentration, and you can see it here, then locally those loops create some stresses. Here what I plotted is the internal stresses due to the dislocations. Initially, for a small volume fraction, you have a few particles, and you have some ORO1 loops. When you have a large amount of particles, then because of the local stresses, they merge together. It's like if the two particles were just like a big one, actually. Just because you have many loops, and they are just touching each other with the stress field. There is a kind of coalescence of the stresses between the particles when you have too many particles. So this is a mechanism that is important for the precipitate hardening. There is what I will call the ORO1 internal stress. This is a kinematic hardening, actually, which is a collective effect, just because they interact together. And what you thought was a single particle could be now a bigger one, just because it has merged with the neighbor particle, just because of the ORO1 looping. Okay. No, precipitated are not moving. So precipitated were just randomly put in the box. And initially you had, they were totally separated, but then as soon as you have put 3 or 4 loops, then the internal stress is merging, just the stress field. The loops are even not touching itself, but the stress field is merging because it has a long range effect. And this, for the new incoming dislocation, it could be seen as a big obstacle. For the first dislocation, it was just 2 obstacles. For the 10th dislocation, it's like a big one, so it's very hard for this to pass through. You see, that's the effect. So it's a collective effect on the hardening. So this was the idea of the internal stress field due to the Rho1 loop. Now the last one, the second one is the misfit strength, as I explained you before, and a good example of that is the superalloys. I know that some of you are working in superalloys. So superalloys is typically the gamma prime, so nickel-based superalloys, where you have a precipitate gamma prime, which is usually smaller in size than the matrix. So the gamma prime minus gamma over the average gamma is -3, 10 -3. So there is a slight shrinkage of the matrix. It's coherent particles, so they are exactly the same network, but they are smaller. And how dislocation behave in that superalloys depends very much on that misfit stress. And here is a calculation of the misfit stress. So this was done by the code again. Here you have the gamma prime. Gamma prime is the blue one, and gamma is the red one. It's the periodic cell. So I just took out a set of channels in the box. So the red one here is plotted there. Just to visualize, to help you to see the view, the cuboids are like this. So this is the gamma prime in full size. But here I just took elementary volume representative. So just the periodic box, which is equivalent to the full system, centered in the matrix, not in the gamma prime. And if I look at the matrix channels, you can see that they are all different. So here what I plotted is the shear stress on one single given slip system. So in that slip system, you have such a local internal stress just due to the misfit stress. Here there is no dislocation yet. It's just initial stage. And you can see that there is what we call the P channel here, where dislocation can propagate easily because there is a huge stress, 400 megapascal. So here dislocation will move very easily for this system. Here there is one which is not active at all. There is zero stress, more or less, on that one. And this one is repulsive. Actually, it will push out the dislocation. It will not forbid the dislocation to come inside this particle if you pull on it. I will show you the next. Oh, why is it not here? Okay, it was just to show you this. The next thing is, why is it later on? Okay. Okay? So just for you to show that the internal stress plays a big role here. Yes, no. So we'll go back to that at my next lecture. I will show you how this influenced the creep of the superalloy. So in my next lecture, which is dedicated to high temperature, I will show you how this influenced the creep behavior. Okay? I thought it was here, but it's the next lecture. So this is for the misfit. And the last one is the elastic moduli. We already spoke many times on that. So elastic moduli, just imagine, for example, here the 2D case. 2D case has been treated in books. In books, you have the solution of infinite dislocations in front of a cylindrical hard or soft particles. So this is a cylindrical particle. Here I will put a dislocation at several places. For example, I put a dislocation here, and I compute the force back on the dislocation. I will explain you later on how this can be done in DD to compute the image force, the one we discussed here, so the interaction force. I put the dislocation here, and I compute the same force at that place. I put it here, and I compute it. So I create a kind of interaction map of the image forces in any place surrounding the particle. And this is how it looks like. This is the case of rigid particles. So this one was 2D. So there is an analytical solution that was given by Santari and Keir in 86. And you can see the evolution of the stress field, which is looking like that. In the case here, you have the particle, which is 1,000 times stronger than the matrix. So it is repelling force. And this is the solution we did with the DD code. You can see that they match pretty well in that 2D case. Of course, with DD, we can do more. We can do no, not more, this is the same, but for the whole is the same thing. Let's say when the particle is now smaller than the matrix, it's similar. I don't know why I put that one. And then we can do more. We can do the spherical hole, a sphere now. A sphere, there is no solution analytically. You need to do it by the computer. And so here I compared the solution for the hole, this is the point here, to the cylinder. Cylinder, we knew that it matches. You see the cylinder was before, so we know we matched very well the solution. And now if we take a sphere, if it's rigid or if it's a hole, you see that these are the DD point, and these are the cylindrical case, analytical cylindrical case. So just to show you that so what did I plot here? First, I should explain you what I plot. Here I plot now the force back on my dislocation when it is closer to the particle. The particle is here, it's at 0. This is the position compared to the particle radius. So here I am far away from the particle, and here I put my dislocation closer and closer and closer. And the closer I am, the higher is the force. So it's a repelling force on the particle. And you can see how it does for the sphere compared to the cylinder. And the same for now a void, how it attracts easily the dislocation compared to the position. So from that, we were able to measure the hardening. And what I wanted to highlight also is that this force is not only on the glide, but it can also be applied on the climb component. So this is the pitch color force, the two components of the force, which is plotted at different positions of the dislocation. If it's here, there. So you see that here it's pure glide dislocations. It's an edge with the Burgers vector horizontally. And here you can see that the pitch color force, there is a component of climb. And if you are even higher, you have a bigger component of climb. So it means that when the dislocation comes, if it's high temperature, high enough, you will have some climb mechanism that will make your dislocation avoid the particles and make more plasticity. So this is a recovery mechanism for this particle hardening mechanism at high temperature. Okay? So out of that, we have the curves. So we can plot some curves. We can plot the hardening stress versus the number of loops, just to have the effect of the first mechanism I told you. So the number of loops which are deposited and this coalescence of the stress field. And this for different size of the particles, and increasing the difference in Young modulus. So delta G is the difference on shear modulus, like this. And what happens is that you have, at this stage or that stage, we found some cross-slip mechanism that were active, that could escape the particles. Also because of cross-slip dislocation, we are able to escape and not to stay there. The Roman loops are just removed by a cross-slipping. Like this. So this is the effect of the change of elastic moduli. And this is the effect of the particle size now. And here there is a nice analytical expression that was given by Fisher, like this, which was in the case they didn't take into account the shear modulus, for example. And in our case, we took into account the shear modulus, and we found that this relationship still stands. You can still apply such a fit, except that the prefactor C here has to be adjusted. So if you adjust this in the case, for example, of such a ratio of modulus between the matrix and the particle, 4 times bigger, then C is 4.4. If you have the same moduli, which was the equation here, you have the slope, which was here, C is equal to 3. Okay? This was, Fisher, I think, was numerical also. I think it was line tension model, no? I think so. I don't remember. This is a study I did a long time ago, so I don't remember. You can have a look to the paper if you want. I can give you the reference. Okay, so not only we have some mechanical physical details with DD, we also have the quantitative data. We have the prefactor, so we are able to compute those data. We have the C factor is computed out of the DD. So this is the conclusion on precipitate hardening, and I will stop here. I think my first lecture. Yeah. So the first thing is that the yield stress, we found that it's evolving like that, depending on the change of elastic moduli, like this, compared to the matrix. So this is a high-dimensional number, where the function, the power here is lower than 1. And the hardening is following the Fisher equation, as I showed you just before, with a C coefficient, which is not the same, depending on the ratio between the particle and the matrix moduli. Okay? And of course, there is the cross-slip that can recover, that can decrease a bit this effect after a few number of loops deposited. Usually after 2 loops or 3 loops, the 4th loop is cross-slipping and going away. It cannot stay there. So it's very rare that you have 4 or 5 loops surrounding the particles. This is impossible if it's non-shearable particles. Do you want a couple of questions maybe? Because I spoke a lot. You also spoke, by the way. So it was a discussion. We had a nice discussion regarding the junction. So who has a question regarding the precipitate now? Maybe you have? Yes? With semi-coherent interface? You mean if they can be sheared, you want to have... Yes, that's something sorry, I told you I don't have enough time to speak on that, but we can put the fact that when the dislocation shear the particles, first you have a critical stress to enter the particles, and this critical stress depends on the surface energy when you create the steps on your particles. So you have a balance between actually this is the exercise we will do tomorrow, so we can speak about that tomorrow. And I did some DD simulation on that, of course, so we can, sometimes it is preferable for the dislocation to shear the particle, sometimes it's preferable to put the ρ1 loops. So in DD it's easy to do, you just need to put this facet strength, as I showed you before, and this facet strength could be a parameter value that can decrease every time the dislocation sheared the particle. So the first dislocation, there is a big strength, let's say 100 megapascal. When the dislocation sheared it, because the intersection between the plane of the particle is smaller, the strength is reduced. So usually you have your particle which is like that. It has been sheared once here, so it means that now the particle is like this. So the surface energy has been created, so this was the strength. But now the strength is reduced because it's like a smaller particles. So it means that you will have a strength for the facet, which will start here and decrease with the number of passage. This is the number of passage of dislocations. And after a given number of passage, let's say when the particle size is small enough, we remove the particle. So this is one way to put that in the DD code. And if you put this, you will have exactly the critical radius at which it's preferable to shear or to bypass by ρ1 mechanism the particle. It's automatic in DD. But again, it is the local rules. I had to put that because DD do not know anything regarding surface energy, this kind of thing. They don't know. So we need to put that by hand in the code. So I have an example where we did it, but it will take 1 hour to speak about that. But maybe later on I can show. Or maybe tomorrow at the tutorial regarding this thing, we can speak about that more. Any other question? That's why I didn't speak about shearable particles. That's true, yes. I should speak more on that. Okay, so thank you, and let's have a coffee break.